Hello, my name is Dayna Jadgeo. Thank you very much for joining a conversation today about my story and my life thus far and well-being in the workplace, something I am extremely passionate and excited to talk to you all about today. My goal for the conversation, I think it's always helpful to have a bit of an outline of what we're about to dive into. My goal for the conversation today is to lend some perspective. I think when we're sharing and creating a space of vulnerability, that's really the only thing that I can do. So hopefully today, there are things that you haven't thought about a certain way, or participation where you haven't participated before, conversation where there hasn't been conversation before, that we all get to enjoy a little bit more of. I'd also like to share a few activity tools that hopefully you'll be able to take back to your team to tackle what I think are some of the real issues of well-being in the workplace. And a lot of the things that I'm about to talk to you today about are from my experience, from my history with mental health and well-being, and also from a lot of the conversations that I hear organizations struggling with and really trying to navigate in their own workplaces. The last thing that I'd like to really achieve today is to have an interactive space where we just get to be real people, not robots, not anyone trying to fulfill any agenda. We're just here to talk and have a chat, and hopefully you get to know me by the end of this. Some things to remember is, yes, this is my story and I will dive into it as much as I can, but it's my story in a professional space. So take all the information that you get today back with a grain of salt, as my experience is not everybody's experience. And hopefully I'll be able to articulate that quite well throughout the next hour. Also, when I speak, I tend to speak with passion, and it's something I'm very proud of. So when I say you, I most of the time don't mean you. And hopefully that's going to be something that also gets conveyed throughout the next hour as well. So without further ado, let us jump into the beginning. So I think a great place to start would be to tell you a little bit about myself, and hopefully we'll kind of navigate where that story goes and the background and context of that into really where well-being sits in the workplace for myself, and how the two are so interconnected for my experience. I grew up with parents who lived in Guyana. Guyana is a country in South America, and they immigrated to Canada when they were in their mid-20s. So they grew up essentially with a very strong background in Guyanese culture, and kind of became very westernized and modernized in the way that they thought, and kind of entered parenthood as well when they lived in Canada. So fast forward a few years, I was born and raised in Canada, lived there for 16 years. So that is why this accent is not going anywhere. And basically, as a kid, I loved and enjoyed school. I thrived in an academic environment. I was a straight A student, and it was a big part of my identity, being part of school and enjoying and thriving in that space. I grew up with a very strong understanding of the importance of a few things, and those things being family, education, and just the importance of being happy. I watched my dad grow and climb in his corporate ladder in space, and also be the best dad in the entire world, present for every single thing that I can imagine. I had a mom who managed to maintain her sanity with my two other siblings and myself, and was present for absolutely everything as well. And I think sometimes it's kind of awkward talking about our parents in a workplace, but as a young person who's kind of just entered that space, my parents are a big part of who's shaped who I am today. My family has. They kind of draw me back to my very strong values. And I think credit where credit's due. This conversation and what I'm able to bring to you to the table today is a big part of some of the conversations we've had as a family, and some of the things that we regularly talk about, where my parents, or be it my extended family, are part of the working world and facing some of the same or similar challenges and obstacles as well. From living in Canada, I lived there for 16 years, like I said. And one day, my dad took me to a McDonald's and sat me down and said, "Hey, here's this newspaper. What do you think about moving to Thailand?" And as a young kid who all I knew was living in my house in Canada, I was pretty shocked and startled, as you can imagine. But the realm and world of living in a different country was so exciting to my family. It was a huge risk that we wanted to take for my dad's job. And so within the span of a couple months, we packed our things up. The movers came, packed the boxes, and we were living in Asia. I think there are lots of things to say about how challenging that was for all of us. But for me, fitting in, being part of an academic space, again, that was really easy. The hard part was actually the curriculum. So I was put into an IB baccalaureate, international baccalaureate program, where the rigor of study is just extremely high, and the caliber of the work that we did was extremely hard. I struggled academically. I kind of went from being this really great student to floating in water most of the time, trying to keep my head up. And it was hard, and it was stressful. And so for quite a few years, while I lived there for 2 years, I was a very stressed kid. I think that's where my journey of mental health really started. I didn't know what anxiety looked like. I didn't know what depression looked like. My parents weren't so much as aware of the different issues and challenges that we face a lot of the time when it comes to mental health at that time. So I kind of navigated the next 2 years, and basically what my parents told me was, if you work hard, you'll get far. And so I believed that and worked really hard and hoped to get really far. 2 years later, I was going to graduate. I'd applied to schools in Canada. I basically had a few schools lined up, and when results came out, I missed my diploma by 1 point. And it was devastating. It was devastating to know that you could work extremely hard and do everything that everybody tells you to do. And part of life is just chance. And I didn't really have that luck at that time. And so by not getting the grades that I anticipated and that my school anticipated, the universities rescinded their offers. And basically, I was an 18-year-old kid who was planning on moving back to Canada with no university to go to, and with a family that instilled education in me for my whole life. University was the only way forward. So I did what I thought everyone did at the time, which was I messaged every admissions school in the UK, because someone told me that the UK had clearing. And lo and behold, I got accepted into the University of Sussex, and did a foundation year, and then entered my degree program, which was a Bachelor of Science in Psychology with Business and Management. That kind of takes me into life in the UK, which for me, it was never my plan to really be in the UK. It kind of happened, and I think I said that for 4 years of doing my degree. This wasn't the plan. This was kind of plan B. But what that meant for me was that I faced a lot of challenges when it came to homesickness, and a lot of confidence and self-esteem struggles and challenges that came from the academic experience that I just had. So moving to the UK was challenging. It was stressful. It was not anticipated, but I did what I could do in the space that I was in. And while I navigated some very extreme challenges with my mental health when it came to being homesick, I tried to use what I learned to help other international students who might have been experiencing the same thing. So in 2017, I got an official GP diagnosis for anxiety and depression, and basically had to figure out what my life looked like with these two tags that were kind of stuck on my shoulder. And that's kind of how it felt at that time. I've learned to navigate and change the way that I articulate that. But that is the way that it felt at that time. So going forward, university was a lot of space of talking to people just like this, having conversations around mental health and well-being, and focusing on how to navigate that challenge in people's lives. Then I graduated. I did exceptionally well, if I do say so myself, and was really proud of the accomplishment that I had created for myself, and entered the workforce quite soon after. So I moved back from Canada to the UK, into London, and that's where I started this job here with Investors in People. I've been here for just over 2.5 years. And I think that segues quite nicely into the rest of the conversation that we're about to have today. So I think a lot of the time, people think that well-being is something that you experience, or mental health is something you experience at stages of your life. I don't know why I didn't think that people in the workplace struggle with their mental health when I wasn't in the workplace. But what I've learned is that the pandemic essentially taught us a lot of different things about what it comes to when we're in the working world. Poor and ill mental health is something that's going to affect either you or someone you're close to, being a colleague or a family member or a friend. And it's something that we have to understand how to navigate and, have a healthy conversation around, but also build awareness and education around. Today, while we talk about well-being in the workplace, I think it always brings us back to this conversation of employee engagement. So you can kind of see a few of the bits and pieces that I've got on the slide here, where I talk about organizations justifying employee engagement with the cost that it requires versus the impact that it has on people. And today, if anything, I hope that what you take away is that at the end of the day, people are humans, humans need support, and that support looks different for everybody. And so a process like, inquiring and asking your team how to support them better, and being able to have the education and awareness to do that effectively is really the way forward. I think I'd like to start off with a bit of an activity, and I hope everyone feels comfortable participating. I'll go first. This is an activity I learned in a mental health first aiding course that I did a couple of weeks ago, and I love it. I think it's a great icebreaker. It's called the Thorn, the Bud, and the Rose. A thorn, it's essentially 3 different elements of your life, and it's meant to kind of really narrow you into the present day. So your thorn, your life, is a prickly thing that's kind of annoying, but it's still there. A bud is something that's exciting that you're looking forward to, and it has to be in the next 24 to 48 hours. And a rose is something that's fantastic, that's already happened, and it's happened in the past 24 hours. So I'm going to give you a second to have a think about what your 3 are. And while you do that, I'm going to share what mine are. So my thorn is that I've got something called H. pylori. It's a really annoying, challenging thing to navigate. It basically is something that I got tested for, and typically it's a very easy fix. You're supposed to get antibiotics. The antibiotics fix it, you sort it. Gut health, great. However, when I was on the antibiotics about a year ago, I had an anaphylactic reaction. I was taken to A&E, started this whole big conversation around what was it that I reacted to. And I've been in hospital multiple times over the past few years to figure out what happened and what medication I can use. Bit of physical health interest, if you will. 86% of the UK actually struggles with poor gut health. If you have indigestion, acid reflux, all those different things, they're elements of poor gut health. And I would urge you to talk to your GP if that's something you're struggling with. And for me, it's been an ongoing conversation. So that's a thorn that's a bit prickly and kind of annoying, but still there. My bud, something I'm looking forward to, is I have a friend who just went through a breakup, which is not very exciting, but he's coming over and we are going to have wine tomorrow and pasta and have a good evening. So that will be exciting. And then my rose is, I think, let's fast forward an hour. My rose is going to be this webinar. I've been looking forward to it for weeks. I've worked extremely hard on being able to build something that hopefully you will find engaging and inspiring at the end of it. And I think I'm going to be proud that I'm able to be vulnerable in a space that's a corporate space and a scary space sometimes, but that's necessary to move the conversation of mental health forward. So given that I've kind of shared those things, what are your thorns? What are your buds? And what are your roses? Feel free to pop them in the chat and we'll kind of have a conversation about it for a couple minutes. So we've got a few people saying their thorn is not enough time. Absolutely true. I had a friend tell me the other day that time is a complete construct and we made it all up. And I thought, yeah, okay. If that works for you, it does. Some thorns or some disabilities, anxiety. Yeah, I feel that one. Physical pain. Some buds, the weekend. Yes, we have a 4-day week this week. Sometimes they feel a little bit longer than a 5-day week. Some people looking forward to running with the dog and your daughters. That's lovely. Your new starter is sitting next to you today. Oh, that's amazing. Welcome. My rose is being able to complete several work tasks in the last 24 hours. Productivity is exciting. Wow, these are fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing. This is a really good activity, you know, when you have a team meeting to kind of raise a few things, get people talking about the space that they're in presently without it being a little too pressurized and stressful. Feel free to use it if you'd like. So we're going to jump into a conversation that I like to call employee to employer. A bit of fact finding for you. So in 2020, millennials, those actually born from 1980 to 1996, equated to 50% of the workforce. And that percentage is due to increase by 25%, so up to 75% in the next 3 years. Another piece of information I always find useful when it comes to this conversation is the understanding that by 2030, we're looking at 1.8 billion young people under the age of 19 entering the workforce. And those people view the world very differently when it comes to how we understand society, how we look at technology, and how we view the corporate social responsibility of private companies providing public goods. So based on this information, I think the perspective that you're going to get from me a lot today is being a person who's just entered the workforce or newly entered the workforce, not just, kind of navigating that conversation in that space. And I think this is a conversation a lot of people struggle with. I hear on the phone, they've got millennials entering the workforce. The millennials sound entitled, they sound this, they sound that. And hopefully this conversation today is to kind of just share, again, a different perspective to maybe shift or give you some thought-provoking pieces of information that might adjust or change the way that you navigate conversations in the future. So the impact of having such a big group of people born in 1980 to that 1996 period and people in their 20s entering the workforce is that there's been a shift in the corporate world. The concept of employers supporting their people has changed from a desire to an expectation. I remember my parents entering the workforce and talking about, oh, it'd be wonderful if. And my siblings and I, when we talk about conversations like that, is, well, why don't they do that? And why would you join that if that's not happening? And so the vocabulary has shifted quite greatly in that generational gap. There's also little to no compromise on the importance of a work-life balance. I think finally, it took a pandemic, but finally the entire workforce understands the importance of striking that balance. And I don't think that balance means shutting off every day at 4 o'clock and being able to switch into your personal life, because I don't think that's realistic for everybody's roles. But I do think there are things that motivate people and inspire people and require that flexibility so that they can juggle both sides of what works for them when it comes to their purpose in work and their purpose at home. I think there's also been a hierarchy shift, a contradiction in the sense of people who are entering the workforce, see a way forward that prioritizes different things than the leaders in the positions that make that happen. And so what you kind of end up having is this bit of a clash. And I can articulate it better with some of the notes that I've made. But because these generations view the world so differently and therefore are working in the world very differently, you're faced with senior leadership teams that believe they've earned their way, which they have, to the top, and come across to millennials and with millennials as being entitled or too soft. I've heard of a lot of companies use words like this to describe millennials. And it's kind of with the understanding of, well, they don't like the way it works. It's tough, navigate it. The issue with this mentality is it kind of pushes young people away, and it creates this retention issue of, better being articulated as young people who want to see change happen from the bottom up. And again, we're in a world that focuses on different things and prioritizes different things. So naturally, that shift has kind of just evolved with us. To make it a little bit more personal, because I think that's the point of this conversation, my parents sacrificed a lot to earn, the life or the American dream that they kind of wanted and dreamed of as immigrants. And as a result, I have a lot more privilege in my life to make decisions that impact the things that they couldn't change in their life when they were entering the workforce. While I say that, this isn't a lot or many of Gen Z and millennials experience. Everybody's got their own challenges to overcome, their own levels of privilege when it comes to the workplace. However, I can say that the conversation, the destigmatization, the education around mental health has dramatically changed when it comes to well-being, when it comes to diversity, when it comes to inclusion, and is much farther along in terms of the conversation than it was several years ago. And it's that shift that we're kind of seeing present in the conversations now, where there's a gap. There's a gap of understanding. There's a gap of empathy when it comes to these different things. And it's an important space to kind of sit in and have uncomfortable and tough conversations to navigate through. I think if I showed you this number, I don't know if you know what it meant, but 80,000 hours. We spend 80,000 hours at work in our lifetimes, approximately. This is a number investors and people uses a lot. And I think it's just a really important number to sit with, because we spend a lot of time doing something that should fulfill us, make us happy, drive our passion, and essentially help us become better people. And it's from this conversation that hopefully you'll be able to take some things back that, help your team do that for your company. I think what it means in general is that the vocabulary has shifted, and I kind of mentioned that just now, but the conversation of care has shifted and changed. And this slide really comes from a conversation we had in our own company about the space that we're in a post-pandemic world. And the reality is several organizations across the world have created a post-pandemic new normal. We knew this was coming. We kind of saw it happening, but we didn't know exactly what was going to happen. And let me break down what's happened. So we're essentially in a remote and hybrid working world, or world of work. There's a much bigger focus on mental health and well-being, as far as we know. And sometimes it's directional, and for some, it's non-directional. There's an understanding that it's important, but we don't know where to go from there. I think there's also been a much bigger understanding and need for work-life balance, and people who have experienced and been experienced in the work field and work life have now kind of understood and grappled with, yeah, this is important, and I'm going to do things that I need to do to find that balance and strike that balance. I think there's also been a higher use of technology and accessibility to technology. We use Zoom. What this means is that the impact of all these different things changing in the workplace in a very short time, under high pressure and the need to survive and stay above water for many organizations, has meant that we've kind of created a space where relationships are quite transactional and lack care. So I wouldn't be myself if I didn't bring some solutions to the table. And from what I've understood, from what I've had fantastic conversations with my team about, is that there's no fruitful benefit or bonus that can compare to the primary goal of genuine interest in supporting people and helping them grow. And if you need me to read that again, I will. Leadership is listening. It's the conscious and intentional act of care. And that's not something anybody has ever had to do. When you think about being in a workplace, you don't actively think, okay, I have to act with care. It's just something that happens. But now we're in a world where we're not socializing with people. We're not next to them. We don't have the ability to put your hand on someone's shoulder with their consent, or be able to say, hey, how's it going today? Want to get a coffee? That becomes much more intentional when it comes to being fulfilled. And that's a much harder thing and space to get into. I think it's also important to be able to come back to this root of what well-being is. And, we can call it lots of different things, and I'll get into that as well. But at the end of the day, well-being in the workplace is making people feel good and happy to be where they are. And that's it. That's the bottom line. That's how simple it is. I think this is a good opportunity to share a bit of an activity, another activity I learned. I'm not sure if anyone notices what this waterfall is. It's Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls is very close to where I live. It's pretty and I like it, and I put it in. I put it in the slideshow. So this activity is with the space when you enter a work hall, you've entered a meeting for the morning, someone is not having a good day, they've completely unloaded and unpacked, and they've kind of just rambled for a good 3 minutes about life and what's going on in their life and what's going wrong in their life and what they're overwhelmed with. And a lot of that time, that makes it quite overwhelming for everybody else in the room. This is another activity I learned from the training that I went through a couple of weeks ago, and I thought it was extremely valuable to share. When someone does something like that, an approach that you could take is this three-step approach, whereby it's about understanding how to support people that are struggling. And I think sometimes we take on this understanding that you want to fix it. I came from a family of fixers, so naturally that was what I thought was going to happen and what needed to happen. And I've learned that sometimes it means being able to support and navigate, but step back. So when someone offloads and shares and does the waterfall and has their moment of being overwhelmed, the first question you could ask them is, out of all the things that you've shared with me today, what's the most important thing? And then they'll probably talk about what that most important thing was. And you might think, oh, I didn't realize that. Or you might think, yeah, that's a big one. That sounds like it's something that needs to be sorted. The next question you ask is, well, what would you like to do about it? Giving people the autonomy and the space to talk about what they want to do to achieve the goals that they have or the challenges that they have puts the ball back in their court, gives them the space when they feel out of control to say, oh, thank you. This is what I'd like to do about it. And then the only thing that you can do after that is say, well, how do you feel now? And it's a non-confrontational, simple way of being able to de-escalate the situation, thus the thermometer, and be able to bring people back into a space where they can take control and step forward and do the things that they need to do so that when they come to work, they can also be their best self. And when they're interacting with their team members, they can also be their best self. Feel free to use that if you'd like. Like I said, the slides are recorded, so we'll be able to share a few of these different things with you in the activities alongside that as well. This slide, so I tried this morning. The sound isn't working on this video, so my colleague Scott has very graciously agreed to put the link in the chat box now. So I think he's going to send you that link now. This is a webinar, or rather a TED Talk, from this woman named Lily Singh. And I'm not a fangirl when it comes to anything or anyone really, but I've understood and kind of watched this person share their story and share their life through YouTube, and a lot of things resonate with me. She's a woman, she's a person of color, she talks pretty candidly about her own mental health, and I like that about her. And recently she did a TED Talk. She's also a comedian, which is very fitting. She did a TED Talk on gender equity and kind of this concept of a seat at the table. And while the video doesn't work today, I hope that at some point you get to kind of take that link and watch it in your own time. It's extremely valuable, very powerful conversation in a very humorous way. But essentially, what she talks about is women's desire to have a seat at the table. And this conversation around what we see is building equity mechanisms, equality mechanisms, sorry. When the reality is we have to be having more conversations around equity mechanisms. When a woman wants a seat at the table, they take their seat when the opportunity arises. And the reality is that seat is not always the most comfortable seat. It could be a wobbly chair. It could be a chair that's flimsy and not strong. It could be a chair that's seated a little bit too far from the table. There are lots of different things that navigate the fact that wanting a seat at the table isn't the end of the story. And so she goes on to this very elaborate way of kind of talking about how to build this space where people are given the opportunity to have equitable resources. And the way she articulates that is, instead of finding a chair that fits, build a table that fits everyone. And so she goes and continues into this analogy of how to build a table that doesn't suck. And I'll run through a few of the things that she's talked about, and then I'll leave it up to you to kind of dive into the rest. But essentially, she says the first thing that we could do is not weaponize gratitude. It's a space where in this perspective, it's about a woman compared to men in the workplace. But I think this stands for every marginalized group of individuals out there, especially marginalized groups that are women and people of color, part of the LGBTQ community, individuals that have disabilities. The scope continues, right? And diversity continues. But it's this idea of weaponizing gratitude. Women should be grateful to have a seat at the table, and a lot of the time, that's what they're met with. People of color should be grateful they have a seat at the table, and a lot of the time, that's what they're met with. And the reality is, without diving into it too much, women and people of color and marginalized groups of individuals should also be paid to sit at the table. And that's a conversation a lot of people in their 20s entering the workforce are having and standing for, as we continue to navigate our careers that continue to progress. The second thing she talks about is investing in potential, being able to give someone a chair that works, a chair that is built from metal, not softwood and not straw. And the third thing that she says is making room at the table is equally as important. When men sit at the table, and they join the conversation, the table gets longer. And the reality is when women join the table, they're often pinned against the other woman at the table to fight for their spot. And so this part of the conversation talks about fighting for multiple spots at the same seat to make sure that we're creating accessible and inclusive resources that fit everybody, where everybody's part of that conversation. Like I said, feel free to dive into the TED if you would like. I'm going to try. Okay, here we go. So the second piece of activity, or the third activity that I think is really exciting and interesting, is understanding your team's emotional energy. I'm not sure if you'll think that this is completely crazy or very exciting. My family this weekend did this personality test and we talked about it as a group of individuals. Typically, I would encourage you to do this at work and not in a family space, but it was very exciting. We understood each other a lot better after it. And I love, spaces where we get to understand people and empathize with things that they find more challenging or tricky, or spaces that they might find a little bit scarier. So this company, 16 Personalities, basically does this personality test where you get to ask and answer a series of questions. And then at the end of it, it gives you a character. Those characters are at the bottom of the screen there. And the character has a title, and it breaks down your different personality traits. And so Scott is going to send you a link in the chat box as well to where you can take the test. But essentially, it's having conversations with your managers, with your team members about the things that we don't really think about impact our day-to-day, but definitely do. The concept of whether someone's an introvert or an extrovert is going to definitely impact the type of conversations that they can have. I am an introvert, but I thrive in extroverted environments. That's why I'm not shaking when I sit here today and talk to you all today. What are your work-life balance views? These different personality traits are going to kind of bring out the questions of if people can talk about this easily, or they might not be as comfortable talking about it, and where you need to create space to ask these questions. What are their motivators? What are the things that have inspired them? Again, we've navigated through an entire pandemic where the world has changed, and what motivates and inspires people now is not the same as what it did a couple years ago. And for many people, it might be the same, but we don't know until we ask. And so it's about creating spaces where people have the ability to have these conversations. The last thing that I think is so important that I couldn't really articulate more is equity mechanisms, asking people, giving people the space to talk about what they need for them to thrive. And I'd like to stress that the only way these different initiatives and these spaces work is if people are given a safe space to talk. And sometimes it's hard to create safe spaces where people feel like they can have conversations that are tough and challenging. It's hard for managers to be vulnerable and share the things that they're struggling with. And I think it's about creating a balance. It's about striking the happy medium. And hopefully this tool is something that might be able to do that and break the ice. I think a lot of the time when we talk about well-being, everyone hears what well-being should be and what it is right now. And I'd love to take credit for this slide, but this is actually something I got from LinkedIn, and credit where credit is absolutely due. It's a very thought-provoking piece. I'm happy to share with you the person that shared it. But essentially, it's this conversation of what well-being in the workplace is and what it's not. And if I tell you right now that what people say well-being is simply mental health first aiders, motivational workshops, gym passes and exercise classes, cool offices and freebies and breakout areas that are fun, a fun EAP service, trendy modes of communication, and fruit bowls, which I just had to put the fruit bowls in there, I think you'd probably look at me and say, yeah, that sounds about right. And I think that's where there's not a but an and. So yes, well-being is a lot of these different things on the left-hand column that you see, and it's understanding realistic workloads. It's the clarity around the roles, the responsibilities, and understanding people's boundaries when it comes to those roles. It's about feeling valued and appreciated and having people know that they're there for a reason and that you appreciate them being there. It's about being able to live the vision that you have a value system, and work off of that value system to build a purpose for people so that when they show up to work, they show up with their full selves and are able to put their full selves forward. It's about being able to feel confident that you have capable leadership and management. And, the secondary part of that is being able to have concise and comprehensible communication, which communication is key. We say it with our partners and our relationships all the time. It's also key, and it's pivotal in a workplace, especially when you're in a remote world, when you've got a hybrid working space, and when people aren't easily next to each other to communicate different things and kind of share body language for you to understand how they're feeling. I think this lens on the fact that, again, we look at well-being strategies as what will work, what will we do, how will we do it, where are we going from here? And this perspective, I just like to share this other side of the conversation, which is the spaces where a well-being strategy won't work. Maybe some of this will resonate with some of your teams, maybe it won't, but I think the other side of the conversation is just as important. When we have senior leadership team members that haven't been given the tools to educate themselves and have an awareness around poor or ill mental health, a well-being strategy is unlikely to work. When you have team members who aren't educated or aware of their own ill mental health, a well-being strategy is unlikely to work. When you've got managers who aren't raising wellness check-ins in their own initiative and on their own time, it's unlikely that they have the safe space that they think they have where a well-being strategy will work. When there's a power imbalance or there's no space for feedback from the bottom moving up, it's unlikely that a well-being strategy is going to work. And that takes me kind of very briefly into this concept of what do you look at when it comes to well-being? What does the strategy look at? What should we look at? And the way we do it is we break it into 3 areas. We look at physical well-being, which looks at musculoskeletal health, things like your physical activity, which is more than the fruit bowls. We look at your environmental factors of sitting in this chair for 8 hours, 5 days a week. We look at psychological, factors. And of course, that talks about mental health and rest and sleep and financial well-being, but it also impacts different areas when we're looking at social well-being. And that inevitably looks at community activities and family-friendly policies, being able to pick your kid up from school or drop them off in the middle of the day and then come back to the table to work. But it also has a very big emphasis on reward and recognition, employee voice, inclusion, and diversity. And I'm very briefly going to say diversity and inclusion gets wrapped up into a very simple word a lot of the time. There's a lot more context to that conversation that's very important to have. And again, we go back to, are we looking for equality? Are we looking to give everybody in the same roles, same number of apples and expecting them to thrive in the same way? Or are we prepared to say, actually, you need oranges, not apples, and you need pears and papayas, not the bananas, and being able to give people what they need to thrive in space. I've talked for very long. So what I'm going to do now is ask you, if you kind of look at this and think, yeah, I could kind of see where our goals are right now. And if you can, please share where your goals are right now when it comes to well-being. Do you think that physical well-being is going really well in your workplace? Do you think that's a challenge because of hybrid working? Do you think that psychological well-being is moved a far way and that's something that's going really well internally? Or do you think that people need a little bit more support when it comes to their well-being and mental health? Or do you think social well-being, when it comes to this conversation of diversity and inclusion, meaningful change when it comes to employee voice, is the part that your organization is finding tricky? I'm going to give you a moment. I'm going to kind of, again, go back into answering a few of these and kind of talking about it. But it's something that I think would be beneficial for us to share. So what area are you working on at the moment internally in your own organization? And Nicola, who says social well-being is very active at the moment and psychological well-being is close behind. That's fantastic to hear. I think we're also in a movement for social well-being to kind of happen, which is fantastic that we're in a transparent world where that's important again. And I completely agree. Psychological well-being doesn't only have to do with the mechanisms you have supporting your team. It also has to do with them and their ability to recognize when something's wrong and something's off and how they go about adjusting that for themselves. We had someone say we worked really hard on our reward and recognition for all employees to demonstrate their value within our organization. That's fantastic. I think we're in a time where people are really looking to reflect and really just assess what happened in the past 2 years. And it's a perfect time to be able to get people to talk about how they're feeling and what worked for them and what they might need more support in. Thanks everybody for sharing. So I'm near to wrapping up. And I think what I'd like to close off with and kind of segue into is my toolbox, the things that help me on a day-to-day basis keep my head above water and, more importantly, swim. So things that help me in a remote space, this is all filtered through the understanding that I work remotely 100% of the time. And for me, having a designated office space is an extremely important piece that helps me thrive. This is my office. This is only my office. And I don't step in here unless work has to get done. And that really helps me be able to enjoy this space and enjoy coming to work because I feel like I'm coming into a space. And I can appreciate, I'm very lucky to be able to have a space like that. But being able to have a desk that sits separately or a part of your dining table that's dedicated only to work where you don't eat at is also another way to get around that. I also use social cues by lighting. Some of my family think I'm a little bit crazy for this, but I think it's helpful. When it's 4 o'clock and we're in the dead of winter and it's dark, I basically use different lighting to tell my brain what time of day it is. So if it's getting dark, I'll put on a bright light, and that means continue working. And as the evening continues, I adjust the lighting and use different lamps or different candles to kind of switch my brain off so that by the end of the day, I know that it's time to finish my day. I also encourage eating away from the desk. There's a lot of these things that I can do every day, and there's a lot that I don't. I ate at my desk today, getting ready for this webinar. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I shut the laptop off every day, and that helps me be able to say, you know what, that's finished, and no one will die until I get back to that tomorrow. There's also ways where I understand that's not possible for everybody. In your iPhone, if you've got an iPhone or an Android setting, I believe you've got settings where you can go into different apps and you can snooze notifications after a certain time so that you're not getting Teams messages at the dinner table. And that's a conversation I recently had with my partner. I went into his phone, I adjusted the settings, and I said, great, let's have dinner. Let's be present and have a conversation with each other. Making my bed every day. I read this earlier today. Doing simple things around your house increase your productivity throughout the day. And so by making my bed every day, I'm able to reset my brain, refocus myself, and feel like I'm moving into a space where things need to get done. The more abstract conversations of cutting through corporate rhetoric is what keeps my well-being in check. And sometimes it's received well and sometimes it's not. But I think it's important to be true to myself and have tough conversations, and challenge things that I don't always think work the best way possible. I think the secondary part of that is authentically bringing myself to work. And we're entering a space where that's more acceptable, thank God, and received better by the corporate world. And investors and people has always encouraged me to do that. And I think that's a big part of what led me to the organization. And the passion that comes with that is what you're seeing here today. The last thing on this toolbox list is more of an HR piece, but it's the idea of a wellness action plan. The ability to enter a space and have a piece of paper that says, hello, manager, this is what I need when things don't go well. These are the things that I struggle with. These are my triggers. This is the information that you'll find helpful to identify when I'm not doing well, and for me to identify when you're not doing well. And it works both ways as well. It has to. So as I wrap today's conversation up, I kind of would just like to say that life is not a straight road, and it's something I'm still figuring out and still navigating. I probably should have figured that out by now. But essentially, my path to where I am today has taught me how to be the resilient person that I am. And it's something that I had to learn at a very young age that I didn't really anticipate. I've learned how to fail forward. I've learned how to redefine failure. And it's actually made me so much stronger because of that opportunity. And I think it's a lot of the time something that people are very scared to do, fail and redefine what that looks like for them. My experience so far has given me the opportunity to take risks and live life on my terms. And in the workplace, it's given me the opportunity to unapologetically bring myself to my space, to know what I deserve and fight for that for myself, but also for the other people in my space that don't have that same voice. And, you know, when it comes to my own mental health, my depression and my anxiety have given me the ability to empathize with people, think differently about scenarios and situations, and approach things differently. It's also given me the space to create solutions where some people don't even see problems. My degree gave me the foundation to build on the knowledge and the interests that I naturally had on human behavior and channel that energy in a way where I can stand here quite confidently to talk to you about mental health in an extremely passionate way. As a society, sometimes I think we've lost the ability to communicate, converse, and care about people without fulfilling our own agendas. And don't get me wrong, I'm not altruistic. I don't think that exists. But I do think that we're in a space where my generation looks at the workplace in a very different way. And sometimes we look at things and we think, oh, that could be working just a little bit better. My story is not isolated. There are several young people entering the workforce, as the stats show, who are just as excited, ready, and eager to make the world a better place and make a little money as well. But I hope today you feel like you've met me. And when I say that, I mean the real me. I think that, or I hope that I've made you think about something, at least one thing in a little bit of a different way. And I hope that you take whatever you've learned today back to your team to implement and use as you see fit to support your own people. I've got a ways to go in the workplace, lots of mountains to climb, lots of victories still to celebrate. And for so many organizations out there, I think, you know, they're trying to find their well-being journey and their well-being groove. And just like them, your journey's just begun. So thank you very much for joining me today. My name is Dayna Jadgeo. I hope you've enjoyed our conversation today. And what I'm happy to do now is share the platform of adding me on LinkedIn if you feel like you resonated with me. If you're kind of looking at well-being in the workplace, feel free to reach out. I will caveat this with, I would love to be a therapist. If I wanted to be a psychologist, I would have chosen a few more degrees along the way. So please, in the space of the working world, reach out, let's connect and continue the conversation to make work better for your people. I'm going to now segue into any questions that you have. I'm here to chat for the next few minutes. I'll try and answer as many as I can. If you have to pop off, feel free to leave. Thank you very much for sticking around and participating today. It's been a pleasure. Emily, yes, we can share the PowerPoint. At the end of this call, you should get, or at the end of this webinar, you'll get an email, or I'll send an email out, and what we'll do is I'll be able to send that across to you. There's a question, can I ask what your suggestions would be in a workplace that by default has flexibility challenges? I think flexibility is something that is different for every organization. And I'm kind of happy to dive into what your organization looks like and how a policy like that could fit for you and your team. But I think, you know, the most important thing to kind of articulate there is the piece of communication that goes around the challenge. Is the challenge people not wanting to have flexibility and not wanting to come into an office? Is the challenge you know, working hours, you know, struggling in a day-to-day time frame? I think that every organization has their boundaries and has things that they need, structure that they need in order for the organization to operate a certain way. And I think that people are not unreasonable, but sometimes it requires just a little bit extra communication for them to understand where you're coming from so that they can meet you with the same approach. Fantastic. Okay, everyone, I am going to say goodbye. Thank you very much for joining again. Have a great rest of your day. Enjoy the sunshine where it hopefully is shining in your area. And hopefully we'll be in touch soon. Take care.